Hello and welcome to the first lesson that accompanies chapter 1 of my book, 21st Century Marketing, What It Is, Why It Matters and How to Do It. During the course of the next week, we'll be sending you one lesson a day to help you get the most out of chapter 1. So, what's the lesson for today? Today we're going to be talking about storytelling, and if you read pages 1 to 6 of my book, I tell you my story. Why do I do that? Well, it's important for you as a marketer to tell your story so people connect with you. And it doesn't really matter whether you're in the B2B market, the business to business market, the B2C market, the business to consumer market. Ultimately, we are in the P2P market, which is the people to people market. And stories help people to connect with people. Storytelling is nothing new. We've been telling stories for thousands and thousands of years, way beyond the ancient Greeks. Greeks such as Socrates and Aristotle, great storytellers, and there's plenty of examples throughout history. But today, probably the best storytellers are Hollywood. And Hollywood directors are fantastic at telling a story and bringing us into the story and immersing us in the storytelling process. And that storytelling process is often referred to as the 3-act structure. And one of my favourite books on the subject is this one by John York. Now, what John tells us on page 30, if I can just find it here, is he talks about the 3-act structure. And in this 3-act structure, he goes into some detail about how it works. Let me give you an example. Act 1 starts with the setup of the story, and it reveals some flaw or need in the hero of the story, the protagonist, and they go through some inciting incident where it kind of proves that they have this flaw or this need. Now they reach a turning point, which is the beginning of Act 2. Act 2 is all about the hero's journey as they go through the movie, as they tell the story, and they're fighting the forces of antagonism, the Mr. Evils that is trying to stop them from achieving their goals or desires. Then eventually they'll reach another turning point, which is the end of Act 2, the beginning of Act 3, which is the climax and the final resolution. And before the end of the act, there'll be an obligatory act where no matter how hard the hero tries, they still can't quite get there. But something happens before they go into the final battle and eventually achieve their ultimate goal. Once they've achieved their ultimate goal, they can never go back to the way they were before, and the world has forever changed. So let me give you a couple of examples. One of my favourites is James Bond. Now, Act 1, you know you're in Act 1 of a James Bond movie because it's the high impact, high action 20-30 minutes at the start of the movie. Act 2, James Bond has to fight the forces of evil, the Blofelds, who are trying to take over the world. Act 3, things are resolved when James protects Queen and country and everything's happy again and Mr. Evil's been knocked out of the equation. That's an example of an action movie. But the forces of antagonism are not always Mr. Evil. Sometimes they can be a flaw within the character themselves. And a great example of this, one of my favourites, is The King's Speech. And in the movie The King's Speech, Colin Firth plays the role of King George VI, who has a speech impediment. He has to give speeches and he's not very good at it because he's got a stutter. The story is how he overcomes that stutter, that flaw, and eventually he gives a fantastic speech which raises the nation just before the beginning of World War II. So there we have two great stories to give examples of the use of the 3-act structure. It also applies to romantic comedies and just about everything else as well. If you're a fan of Hugh Grant, stories like Love Actually, Notting Hill, Bridget Jones's Diary, they all follow this structure. So why is that important to us as marketers? Well, as marketers, we need to engage our target audience. We need for them to engage with us. Before the internet, marketing was very different, and we'll explain more about this as we go through the course. In the early days, advertising was the main thing that we did as marketers. So we would send out as many marketing messages as we could, which were purely sales-based because messages were expensive to send, and bash you over the head until you gave in and bought our products, or not, as the case may be. But in the 21st century, our target audience is far more engaged with us, particularly through the likes of social media, and that's why we need to be good at storytelling. So I hope you found that interesting, and your homework from this lesson is to read pages 1 to 6 of my book and see if you can identify the 3 acts that I use in telling my story. See if you can work out how it's done. And then I'd like you to take your story and apply the 3-act structure to tell your story. Because if you can do that, your story becomes very compelling, very believable, and therefore it builds trust between you and your target audience. Now, for the rest of the course, you'll be introduced to the virtual training team here at 21st Century Marketing, where each day you'll go through one of the topics in detail. Now, what I'd like you to do as you go through these lessons is refer to the relevant section of Chapter 1 and read along as you're going through the course, because that way you'll get the most out of it. I hope you enjoy the course, and thank you for joining us here.